So I'm with Steve Webb from the Liberal Democrats. I have, Steve, 500 or more questions here from our job seekers. We've singled out 5 that are representative, and we have 5 minutes for you to answer those questions. So I'll get straight into it. The first is from Abu from London, who asks, how do you intend to get young people back to work?
I think one of the barriers young people face is their lack of experience. They go for a job and they say, oh, we want someone with experience. And they say, how do I get experience without having a job? And one of the ways we think you can break through this is through the use of paid internships. And often internships can be the privilege of the well-off. You know, if mummy and daddy can support you, then you can work for nothing for someone, then you get experience, then you get an advantage in the job market. And we want to open up what's a good thing, internships, but to a much broader group of people. So we're proposing that young people who've been unemployed for 3 months or more should be able to have paid internships, just paid a bit more than benefit, not a king's ransom, but enough to live on, to give them that period of experience. And we want to do that in the first year of a new parliament, while the recession's still deep, while the economy's still fragile, to help perhaps a generation of young people to have contact with the labour market. The other thing we want to do is help young people really from day one. Too many government schemes come in after 10 months or 12 months or 2 years, and it's an awful long time when you're 17 or 18. I mean, it's bad enough when you're 50 or 60. And what we're saying is on day one, actually, you can spot the young people who are going to struggle to find a job. And we want to identify their needs on day one and try and give them tailored support. Some young people will find a job easily, but those who won't, help them early, don't let them struggle for a few years, and then try and pick them up later.
Okay, thank you. Our second question is from Jeff in Blackpool, who asks, how can you stop the influx of foreign workers that are taking jobs away from UK citizens?
Obviously, there's 2 different sorts of workers coming into the UK. There's those from within the EU, and broadly speaking, there's freedom of labour, freedom of movement within that, and that's not something we can change. However, if the EU does get larger again, I think we'd want to learn the lessons of the last time the EU enlarged, because I think the number of people coming to work in Britain from countries such as Poland and so on was larger than was expected and was quite a handful. So I think we'd learn those lessons and perhaps manage that process more. But in terms of people coming from outside the EU, we very much support the approach that says really it should be first call for British workers for vacancies, so they should have to be advertised through job centres, and really we should only be taking folk from outside the EU in shortage occupations where there's a real skill that we need. But even there, if we identify skill shortage areas, we should then be doing something about it, training up British workers so that in years to come we can fill those vacancies at home.
The third question, Steve, comes from Douglas in Milton Keynes, who asks, all I hear about is help for youth. What about the older worker who's been hit by redundancies?
This is something that I think is a very important issue. I spoke at a conference on the employment issues for older workers recently, and I said it was actually very rare to be asked to address the issue because all the focus tends to be on younger workers. One of the things that the Liberal Democrats are very hot on is opposition to age discrimination, because very often older workers there's this sense of, oh, you know, you're too old, and we really want to crack down on that. You know, society has understood you shouldn't discriminate against someone for being black or disabled or because of their gender. But age somehow seems okay, and we don't think it is. So we want to get tougher on discrimination by employers. We also want to make it easier for people to retrain, perhaps in new areas, because many older workers may have worked, in some cases, in one job or one profession all their lives. And if that's going through a period of structural decline, you know, there just aren't the steel jobs or whatever it happens to be, then you can't just say, well, we'll just hit you with a bigger and bigger stick and force you to apply for jobs if the jobs aren't there. So either we enable people to retrain in new professions, or we as government make sure that the demand in the economy is there for new jobs. And just to give you one example, we think that, again, the priority for the first year of Liberal Democrat government is a kind of green jobs package, where we're improving the infrastructure of the country, whether it's things like home energy efficiency, transport networks, all these kind of things that are good for the long-term health of the economy, jobs that need doing, and very often older workers will have the skills, can move into these newer areas, renewable energy and so on, which maybe a generation ago wasn't available, but uses the skills that they've got.
Okay, our fourth question is from Becky in Cardiff, who's asking, what will you do to support the upskilling and training of the UK workforce to help us compete on the world stage?
I think we have to start young. One of the problems is I think many people who've got a lot to contribute to the labour market drop out of school, either literally drop out of school at 14, 15, or disengage and become disaffected, and we lose their talents. And it may be that young people who are perhaps not so suited to an academic career could do much more vocational studying, which even now, despite all the rhetoric about, parity of esteem and, it's all equally valued, there's still this slight sort of looking down your nose at people who do vocational courses. Yet as a country, we desperately need those skills, and often those jobs are being filled by folk coming in because we haven't got them. So we'd start with the school system, starting particularly at age 14, making sure that vocational qualifications have the same status, have the amount of support that they need, so that people leaving school not only have the basic skills that they need, but can have already started thinking vocationally. So we need to do that for younger people. But then we need the understanding that education doesn't stop when you turn 16 or 18. You know, we need a culture of lifelong learning. And my worry about the present recession is it's FE colleges and this kind of things that are being the first to be cut. And what we want to make sure is that these frontline services are protected as far as possible.
And then Chris from Birmingham is asking, what can the UK government do to help support small and medium-sized businesses with the aim of building growth in the UK economy and reducing unemployment?
I think one of the big burdens that I've picked up as an individual MP for business and smaller businesses in particular is access to funds. We've found that the banks have been appalling in recent months and recent years, even and perhaps even particularly the taxpayer-funded banks or taxpayer-owned banks. They've just been so unwilling to lend. You know, they've been so cautious, so keen to use our money to build up their balance sheets rather than to lend it to business prospects. So we would require, particularly the banks that we, the taxpayer, have either bailed out or own, to meet lending criteria so that they're getting cash into these smaller and medium-sized banks. We also want to use a levy on bank profits so that, you know, the Barclays or whoever of this world who are making multi-billion pound profits, the taxpayers getting some of the money back that the taxpayers put in to bail out the whole banking system. One of the very specific things is that we want small businesses to have an easier burden with the business rates. Very often that's quite a hefty burden on you know, a small shop or something like that. We want to make sure a small business rate relief is automatic and that the whole structure is geared to enable people to get into business, to get premises and to prosper as a result.
And finally, a question from me. What do you feel uniquely equips you to be our next Secretary of State for Work and Pensions?
Well, my own background is as an economist with the Institute for Fiscal Studies for 9 years, but also I think I found as an MP in an area, we're in South Gloucestershire where unemployment is just about 1%, and so we're an area where the economy has done well, it's performed strongly, and so I've seen, as it were, both what can make for a successful business, but also some of the barriers that businesses face and the impact of the recession. And I would hope to bring my professional skills, but also the Liberal Democrat belief that you shouldn't be writing anybody off, that you shouldn't let people, you know, rot on benefit, but should actually be getting in there early, supporting them, and I think that's a much better way of approaching issues of employment and the economy than we've ever had before.
Steve Webb, thank you very much. Thank you.